This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
It's time for today's Lucky Land horoscope with Victoria Cash. Life's gotten mundane, so shake up the daily routine and be adventurous with a trip to Lucky Land. You know what they say. Your chance to win starts with a spin. So go to LuckyLandSlots.com to play over 100 social casino-style games for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. Get lucky today at LuckyLandSlots.com.
Available to players in the U.S., excluding Washington and Michigan. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
We made this.
Welcome to the Japan on Film podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine. I've got, for those of you watching on YouTube, I've got my son down here in the corner, so sorry if he starts acting up a little bit. But I'm joined today by a returning guest, and that is Jenn. Jenn, how you doing today?
Pretty good.
So, we've had you on the show a few times, so I don't think we have to go through and have you introduce yourself to everybody again. So let's just jump right into the movie. Today, we are discussing My Friend A, which was in Japanese titled Yuzai, and we'll talk about what that title means in a little bit. And from 2018, a fairly recent one. And I believe that this was actually first released to streaming on Japan's WoW streaming service or cable network. I can't remember exactly what it is. It's one I don't have, so that's why. And my wife actually recommended this movie because she had heard about it. And ironically enough, when I sat down to watch it last night, she wasn't at home, so she still hasn't gotten to see it. But I had to watch it for the show, so I was glad you suggested it. And this is apparently based on a true story from what she told me, but I haven't really looked up much about that. But anyway, let's start talking about it. What is your history with this movie? Did you see it before you emailed me about coming on to discuss it, or was it just one that you had heard about, or what's your history with it?
I've never heard of this. I was looking through your stuff and I was like, ooh, I like Toma Ikuta. So I was like, I will watch almost anything he's in. And then watched this movie twice and was like, I'm so confused.
There's a lot of plot in this movie. There's a lot of stuff that goes on.
There's so much happening. There's 5 distinctive characters that I was like, I feel like this should have been a TV show. Mm-hmm. And then I found out it was based on a book, and I was like, ooh, if I find the book and maybe I just really quickly read through it or something, it'll help. But they don't have it in English.
Yeah, that figures. I'm guessing that's I'm guessing that's the true story that my wife mentioned. I'm guessing the book was maybe this reporter's account or something like that. So the title in English, the title is My Friend A. And the A in here refers to the fact that so one of the main characters, Suzuki, when he was a child, he had killed 2 of his classmates. And what they do in the Japanese press is when a child is involved in a crime, they don't name the child in public documents. So it's just done with shonen or elementary school young boy A or B or C like that. So they don't have the actual names of the people in the press. And I think that's what that's referring to with the English title. But the Japanese title is Yuzai. And I looked up this word because I'd never seen this before. And Google translated the kanji together as friendship, but my Japanese English dictionary said that it wasn't actually a word. So I talked to my wife about it because it's made up of two characters. The U character is for friend, and the Xi character means like guilt or sin or something like that. And I was asking my wife about it, and she said that it could have a few different meanings. It could mean like a guilty friend, or feeling guilt about a friend, or something like that. So that's kind of where the history of the title comes into it.
I guess that works on like multiple levels.
Yeah, that's exactly what she said. She said it can be read a few different ways because there is no word with these two kanji together. So when they mix them up like this, it's just done to kind of evoke the feeling of those two kanji together. So it has a few different meanings. It can be interpreted a few different ways. And both of those interpretations, like guilty friend or guilt about a friend, would both fit. But like you said, Toma Ikuta is the main character, plays Masuda, who was once a journalist, but he had a situation involving his editor, and he works at this factory. And he meets in the factory, he's living in a dorm with three of his coworkers. One of them, who's also just started at the factory, is Suzuki. And Suzuki's kind of very isolated. He doesn't really talk to anyone else. It takes him a while to warm up to everybody. And he doesn't talk about his past at all. And when one of Masuda's former college friends, or it's not really made exactly clear, she's a reporter, and she talks to him because there'd been a murder similar to one where these two elementary school kids had been murdered about 15 years ago. And she suspects it might be this same boy killer, which Masuda suspects might be Suzuki, based on what he knows about him. And he ends up writing an article about it, and it follows, like you said, a few different characters. There's Suzuki and Masuda and their friendship. There's also Miyoko, who is a former adult film actress who was kind of forced into it, and she's trying to rebuild her life. She ends up starting up a relationship with Suzuki. And there's also Shiraishi, who is a former teacher at kind of like a special needs school for children who have had mental problems or criminal issues. And she was Suzuki's teacher back in the day. And the weirdest one here was this cab driver, Yamauchi, who his son had killed 3 children in a car accident. He was driving without a license, and it had resulted in Yamauchi's family splitting up. And Yamauchi is working as a cab driver and trying to pay compensation to the family of the victim still, and while his son is still trying to rebuild his life. So like you said, there's a lot of plot. It can be a little bit confusing and to follow at times. But overall, what did you think of this movie?
I think overall, I liked it. I mean, obviously, I watched it twice because I was like, I watched it and then I got to the end and I was like, I'm confused. I feel like maybe I missed something. Like, I was like, was there like a 2-minute gap when I went to go find something to eat that I missed something? And then I watched it again. I was like, nope, I missed nothing. Mm-hmm. This is very good. It's very good, but it's very confusing. It feels like one of those very cerebral things where it's like more you're supposed to like sit with it and the characters, but it moved so fast that it was very confusing. I kept confusing the friend, Masuda's friend, the like journalist lady, with the lady from the like detention center kids. Like, I thought they were the same person for like a little bit. And then she's a daughter who's in it for like all of 2 minutes. And then for also a little bit, I was like, oh, is the cab driver Suzuki's dad? And then I was like, oh no, that's wrong.
Yeah.
Because their crime is very similar, and they only talk about it as like, oh, you killed your classmate. And so I was like, oh, are they the same person?
There's also something early on where when Yamauchi is in the store and they talk about your son and your wife were responsible, and they never really made clear like how his wife was involved in that too. And so at the time too, I also thought they were talking about Suzuki, especially because they found that sketchbook that Suzuki had where he had pictures he had drawn sketches of this naked older woman. And so I had wondered, wait, so was him and his mom involved in the murder of these two kids? And now Yamauchi is the father and is paying off. Like the whole Yamauchi subplot, it felt so disconnected. That was one I think I get what they're trying to do with it, trying to show the effects of family on this, but he's the only one who has no direct connection to the rest of the story, unless I was missing something. Am I right with that?
That's what I think. So that's why I was like, ooh, would this have made more sense if this was like a 5 or 6 episode like TV show, and like each episode focused on like one of the people, and you could see how they like interact with each other.
Yeah.
If they do. But I was like, his scenes being so shoehorned, and they were all short.
They were all
and they were
short,
weird and like disjointed. And I was just like, oh. But then they would just kind of be like shoved in there. I almost feel like if you took him out, maybe it wouldn't work though. Because I'm like, I guess he was like an important. I guess it depends on what you take away from the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I like the scenes with him, and I like what they were showing about it, because, you know, I had a different impression of this movie going into it, based on the description. Like, it kind of seemed like it was going to be like more of a suspense movie or a thriller in some ways, and you know, like this whole idea of him trying to find out if this guy he's working with is a serial killer. So I was really kind of surprised that what we got instead was this meditation on guilt and how society deals with guilt. So it was a nice surprise, but it was definitely different from what I expected, because if you read the summaries of this online or descriptions, it seems like it's a very different movie from what we end up getting. Did you have that sense too going into it? I'm not sure how much you had read about this movie before.
I had only read the short little like blurbs, and yeah, I thought that this was gonna be a like, ooh, people were actively dying in the movie, and it was gonna be some weird like suspense thriller where someone's like an investigative journalist and like trying to like figure out who the killer is and like being chased by like or something like that. And then it was not.
Yeah.
And
I had
was
the
like
exact same idea.
Very different. I mean, it was still good, but I'm just like, it was very different than I expected. And I don't know if some of that comes from like, I've only ever seen Tomita in fairly dramatic or very comedic roles. So I think I expected him to go in one of those other two ways. So okay. Like maybe that plays into it too.
Probably, yeah. I had no expectations going into it. I don't think I've seen anything else that he's been in, so I didn't have any of those impressions getting into it. But I did like this kind of exploration of the way that Japanese society deals with guilt. And that's something we'll get into as we continue this discussion. But what were some things that really jumped out at you? You know, we had mentioned the cab driver stuff and how that kind of felt disconnected from it. What other things kind of caught your eye in this?
I think it's the fact that like Suzuki gets beaten up a lot. And he never seems to fight back at people. He actually starts hitting himself in the head with a rock at one point. I was like, oh, taking a very drastic turn from where I thought we were ever going to go.
Right, yeah.
Because when he's first getting beaten up by those dudes in the house, I was like, ooh, this is where it's going to turn. And he's going to kill people. And then he just continues to get beaten up.
Yeah, how he gets beaten up a lot in this movie, that jumped out to me as well, because there are these scenes when you think he's going to snap, when you think he's going to react in some way. Like when he meets... the first time he meets Miyoko, right? When he sees her and her ex-boyfriend fighting, and he's just kind of standing there watching, and the ex-boyfriend turns on him and gets him roped into it. And you think he's going to fight back, but he doesn't really. He just kind of stands there and takes it. And also when his flatmate comes after him as well, because he goes in there and he takes and he smashes the TV screen when they find out that the ex-boyfriend has, again, there's a lot of plot in this movie, so be prepared for spoilers, guys. But we can't really talk about some of this without talking about some of these things that happen in it. But so Miyoko is a former porn actress, a former AV star. Her ex-boyfriend had forced her into it, and after she starts seeing Suzuki, which I'm not sure how they were able to find out Suzuki's address, but the ex-boyfriend leaves a DVD for them in the mail. So they find it, his flatmates start watching it, and they're like, oh, that's Miyoko. That's Suzuki's girlfriend in there. And then when Suzuki comes home and he sees them watching it, he tries to tell them to shut it off, and they don't. And then he smashes the TV screen, and the flatmate comes after him and starts beating him. And you keep expecting him to fight back, but he never does. In fact, he starts laughing instead. And also when he goes back to Miyoko's apartment and the ex-boyfriend shows up, he tackles the ex-boyfriend, but then also, doesn't fight back. And in fact, starts pleading with the ex-boyfriend to kill him. And then he starts bashing his own head in with a rock, like you were saying. So yeah, I thought, and then that we get the understanding why, because in that scene when he's in the park with, or not in the park, but later when they're in, when he's with Masuda, and he tells Masuda that the only way he can atone is by dying. And he tells him that he's not going to kill anyone again. He's not going to go down that road. So I took that to mean that he had taken almost a vow of nonviolence in a sense.
I can see that. Because he does get beaten up. Like a lot.
Mm-hmm. There's also the relationship, because we get this. And one of the things that kind of disappointed me is we get all this stuff with the cab driver and all these extended stories, but I really wanted to know more about Suzuki's past, because we get we only get vague hints about what happened. And we find out that Masuda says that Suzuki's mother had assaulted him, but we don't get much description of it beyond that. And then we see the thing where he has got the sketchbook, and he had sketched drawings of his teacher, Shiraishi, from the special needs school, naked. And we see a few scenes where he interacts with her, and he speaks with her, but we never find out what their relationship was. Like, when he was sketching her like this, like, I was wondering, did his mother have a sexual relationship? Did she sexually abuse him? And then has that given him this, did he also have a warped relationship with his teacher, or was he just sketching her and just imagining her naked? I couldn't understand what that was all going on there. And I was wondering, why we didn't get more of that. What was your take on that relationship?
Oh my God, that was like the question mark that I always had. I was like, what was the point of that? Well, because it's like, yeah, you see the sketchbook, and then you're not super sure how they're tied together, but then, because the first time you see her, she's talking to that guy, and they're using his older name.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, he changed his name, but right. Then I didn't realize that they were connected, like that was the same person, until she goes to meet him. And then that's the first time you see him have like any emotion. And he's like really excited to see her. And I was very confused because I was like, what is happening here? I feel like that's why I'm like, I feel like this should have been longer, but I don't feel like it could have been longer. It was already like 2 hours long.
Yeah, it's a long movie. And I felt that it did drag in places because they have all these different narratives they're trying to follow. And some of the choices they make about how they're going to explore these narratives was strange to me, because there are, like you said, the question mark is a perfect way of describing it. And it seems like some of the scenes are displayed out of order, because when he's talking with her, he's talking about how he had gone out with his friends, and and then afterwards he had bought them yakitori and all this, and at first I thought he's making up a story, but then later we see him with the flatmates, and he had bought them yakitori, and I wasn't sure, was he making that up? Was that actually for some reason displayed before? Like, was that other scene with him going out with the flatmates supposed to be a flashback? It was a very odd placement within the structure of the movie.
Maybe that's also like the really confusing thing to me about this movie, is I could not tell how long like a time span was supposed to happen. Because it's not like everyone ages or something throughout this movie. Like, everyone is the same age. Like, technology doesn't change or anything. I mean, other than the TV that he breaks and then buys him a new one.
Right.
So it's just like everything is in this one moment in time. And it is very unclear where I was like, is this taking place over like 4 days?
Mm-hmm.
It can't be taking place over 4 days though, because that one guy gets his like fingers cut off, which was also very random.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they immediately stopped talking about the fact that they work at a factory.
Mm-hmm.
Like they were in the factory for a while. Then he gets his like 2 fingers cut off, which was also a very weird scene because then Suzuki just so calm about it, picks him up and like puts him in a bag filled with ice and water.
Yeah.
So calmly. And then you see him like going to the hospital and then back with his hand like bandaged up. Mm-hmm. And then that's it. Like they never talk about it again.
Yeah.
They never like, talk about the factory ever again.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, so was the factory not important?
I guess not. Yeah. I think it was just an excuse to bring these characters all together. So one of the interesting things about this movie is it's kind of serendipitous that I watched this movie after I finished listening to this podcast series called The Evaporated. Have you heard about this?
No, but I'm always down for a good podcast.
Okay, so this is a great podcast. It's called The Evaporated, and it's hosted by The Evaporated, Gone with the Gods. And it's hosted by Jake Adelstein, who wrote Tokyo Vice. He's been a reporter in Japan for an American reporter living in Japan for decades now. And what it's about is what got him started in this podcast is the idea of Johatsu, where people go missing, like people who choose sometimes of their own volition. And what happened is back in 2018, his accountant had just disappeared, like just, completely disappeared. Nobody knew what happened to him or anything like that. And it's a limited podcast. It's 9 episodes, and it goes through this whole idea in Japan, this whole phenomenon in a way of people just choosing to disappear, running away from their lives, basically. And it talks also about, people who've been kidnapped as well. It goes into those types of disappearances, and it's like this whole shadow industry in Japan, where there are these night movers, where you pay them money, they'll come into your house in the middle of the night, move all your stuff out, and help you get set up in a new city. And there are different degrees of legality. There are some who just help you move out, and but there are other ones who will, help you get a new identity even too. And those are obviously on the shadier end of things. And people do this for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they do it to escape debt. Sometimes they do it to escape abuse. They do it to escape, to try and reinvent themselves, whatever it might be. So it's this huge phenomenon. It's a really fascinating podcast. So I definitely recommend people check that out. And I'm glad I had finished listening to that before I watched this movie, because it gave a lot of that background context that I don't think I would have had otherwise. Because every single character in this, or at least the one, like the 3 major characters, right? We have Masuda, Suzuki, and Miyoko, and to a lesser extent Yamauchi. All of them seem to be in this situation where they have chosen to kind of run away from their lives and try to reinvent themselves. So I thought that gave a lot of context for this movie. So if I hadn't listened to that podcast, I think I would have been a lot more confused than I was. But the whole stuff with Miyoko, where she had gone to Tokyo against her parents' wishes after she had finished school, and she had said that, if you had asked me what I did, I would say that I had worked in a pub. I had worked in a bar. So I took that to mean like she was probably in one of these seedier bars where they offer sexual services. So some of them are straight up prostitution fronts. Some of them they will, because there are legalities of prostitution in Japan. If it's oral or anal, then it's legal. If it's vaginal, then it's considered prostitution. So there are bars in like red light districts where you can get like blowjob bars, they're called, or something like that. So I guess the impression there is that she had worked in one of these places. She had met this guy who was probably a client there or something, and he had started having her work in adult movies. And so she had made a bunch of these adult movies, and then she she ran away, and he tracks her down. He finds her and starts harassing her to come back. And that's kind of how they get involved into Suzuki's story. Suzuki, obviously, right? He was someone who had been arrested as a child for these murders. And Japan generally doesn't try children as adults. So usually if there's a child offender, they'll put them in one of these special schools where these kids with behavioral problems or have committed crimes, they'll try to re-educate them, get them reintroduced into society. So that was kind of the thing with Suzuki and Shiraishi. And the whole idea is their criminal records are supposed to be kept secret. They're supposed to be sealed. So they're allowed to, restart their lives in a way. But of course, obviously that's kind of like the double-edged sword with this, because even though the law gives them a chance to rehabilitate and to reintegrate in society, the people in society, it's quite a different story. I'm not sure if you had any thoughts about any of that stuff.
No, it's interesting. I need to listen to that podcast because I'm like, I didn't know you could just like pay people to like help you escape debt.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my dream.
It's a big thing in Japan. So,
that's wild though.
It provided a lot of interesting context for me. So I'm glad that I had listened to that first. And just, pure happenstance happened, but that provided that context.
No, it's interesting though, because like I watched a short documentary and I cannot now for the life of me remember if it was like on TV or on YouTube. I feel like it had to be on YouTube. I can't imagine it being on TV. Mm-hmm. About like, I think it was about Japan's criminal justice system, specifically around like minors. Mm-hmm. And how there was like this weird, I don't know if they changed it because I don't remember how old this is. My brain doesn't do time well anymore. Where it was like, oh, there's like a certain age where they just kind of are like, oh, there's just like kids being kids. And it was like being taken advantage of by kids who were just like, oh, so you can like murder someone and it would not, like nothing would come of it because they would just be like, oh, kids.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't think that's the same thing as like stealing from a store.
Yeah, there are a lot of criticisms you can have of the Japanese criminal justice system. That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, I was like, it was just interesting to this when I was like, it made me remember it, and now I can't find it, and I looked for it on YouTube, but I wouldn't know what to look for without really messing up my like Google Analytics and like suggestions. But I just remember that, and I was like, oh, but that didn't seem like what this was, or with that other guy, son. Who then you see the son and then you watch his wedding, which was very weird. Mm-hmm. That was confusing.
Well, I mean, one of the scenes I really liked in here, even though the stuff with Yamauchi feels completely disconnected from the narrative, and there was that one scene I liked when his son comes to him and talks to him, and his father's upset about the fact that his son's getting married. He's, his fiance is pregnant, and he tells him, he's like, you took the lives of 3 children and now you're going to have a family of your own. And his son says, well, what do you expect me to do? Do you want me to kill my child? Is that what I should do? And I like that conversation because it raises an interesting question. Like, what is someone supposed to do in that situation? Is there a way for them to atone, or are they just, supposed to give up their life? And that ties into Suzuki's thing, where Suzuki kind of says, like, there's no point in me living anymore, but I still want to live, so that's why I can't kill myself. So I thought that was a nice question raised about the idea of rehabilitation and atonement and all that. Did you have any takes on that?
It's interesting. I'm thinking about it now, and I'm like, I feel like this movie maybe would have been a little bit better if the 3 characters had been the like 2 main guys and the son. Mm-hmm. That dude's son. Or actually, no, I like it being the dad. I feel like if they had focused more on those 3 stories, I feel like it would have been really impactful. Because I do feel like the 3 of them show different ways that we deal with guilt. Like the dad, like the cab driver's lets his consume him. And then like Matsuda gets another chance, I guess.
Yeah. There's also that,
in a sense. And then Suzuki is like trying to atone for his, which then kind of puts the 2 ladies in their own kind of weird like Oh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean the whole thing, and we'll talk about Shiraishi because there's an interesting thing that happens with her and her daughter. But I did want to talk about the Yamauchi a little bit more because that one of the things he does is when he's still living in that same town, and he goes and he's talking to he goes into a store, and the people who run the store, they're the parents of one of the girls that was killed by his son. And the father says something interesting at one point where he says, every time we get the compensation money from you, we're reminded again of what your family had done to us. And I remember thinking, I'm like, well, because that also goes to the idea of like, what are you supposed to do in that situation? Because first off, it wasn't him, it was his son who did it, but you're still holding him accountable for it. And then he's paying you the compensation money, and you're mad because he's paying you the compensation money, but you're still accepting the compensation money anyway. So there's that hypocrisy aspect of it as well.
Which is like, I get it though, because on like some end, I'm like, that must be in such a weird place to be in, where you're just like, it opens up that big question, which this is not the time or place for the question of like, how much is a human life worth? And like, who gets to judge what like a human's life is worth? Because we're all going to judge people differently based off like our experience with them. Like, people are going to judge their children and close friends as more important, which is fair and understandable.
Absolutely. Yeah, I thought that was an interesting point. There's also some weird logic holes in this movie. So I had mentioned about the fact that the ex-boyfriend gives Suzuki the DVD, but my whole thing there is like, well, how does he know where Suzuki lives? That just comes out of nowhere. And I understand how he knows where Miyoko lives because he's tracked her down, but
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Hey guys, it is Ryan. I'm not sure if you know this about me, but I'm a bit of a fun fanatic when I can. I like to work, but I like fun too. It's a thing. And now the truth is out there. I can tell you about my favorite place to have fun. Chumba Casino. They have hundreds of social casino style games to choose from with new games released each week. You can play for free anytime, anywhere, and each day brings a new chance to collect daily bonuses. So join me in the fun. Sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
There's no sense of we needed a scene of something of like him following Suzuki or something to see where he lived, but that just comes out of nowhere because he doesn't know Suzuki's name. He doesn't know anything about him. And yet he's able to get this DVD delivered to him. And then also with, so Masuda has this, he writes this article after he's doing, after his former classmate or whatever, or colleague or whatever, talks to him about investigating. That's also a weird thing too, because she asked him to investigate this. And it seems like she's asking just, on a whim, but it's almost like I can understand it if she knew that Suzuki was working there or something, but that isn't touched on at all. It's almost like she just goes to Masuda, and it just so happens that Masuda is working with Suzuki. So that felt like a weird kind of coincidence. And then Masuda writes the article, and he's telling her that he doesn't want to publish it, but he lets her read it anyway. And he says, I still want to know what the truth is of all this, and I'm just trying to figure stuff out. But he says, I don't want this published at all. I don't want to be a reporter anymore. And she says to him, she's like, well, in that you talked about the karaoke video. Can you show it to me? And he says, okay, I'll show it to you. He doesn't send her the video. He just shows it to her on his phone. And yet somehow she's able to get the video because she uses a photo of it in the article, and she prints the article. So that was a weird logical. Like, I didn't understand how that worked because it seemed
okay, thank you. That was like my big question too. I was like, how did she get that picture?
Yeah.
Because it's weird too, because you see the editor guy, the like old dude in the restaurant when they're like talking about this, and he's like showing her the thing, but you like don't see, he's too far to see what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, he couldn't have like taken a picture of his screen. Also,
Right.
I've tried to take a picture of like a phone screen, and it never ends well.
Yeah.
But like, I was like, where did she get that photo?
Yeah.
He would have had to give it to her. Like, also, I just assumed that the ex-boyfriend, someone who knew him, was like at the karaoke or something, because they're not in like a private place. There's like a lot of people around.
Mm-hmm.
So I just assumed maybe someone saw them there and followed them. But that was also, made no sense. I was like, were they just like delivering porn videos to like random people in hopes that they just like got the right house and someone was like, oh, that's really weird that there's just people that got this and we're like, what's happening?
Right. Yeah. The boyfriend also makes a mention of the fact that, the girl you were friends with or something like that committed suicide. I'm like, what is this coming from? Where is this coming
you're
from?
like, who's that?
Yeah. That also came out of nowhere. And I couldn't understand it. I mean, it's one thing if like, there's no mention of this girl. She's only mentioned that one part and it's never followed up on again. He hires two guys to break into her house and rape her too and film it, which also I thought was completely unnecessary. It was just
I was like, what was the point of this?
Yeah. I mean, I get he's trying to say like, he's like, oh, we had fun making, I'm like, but I
feel like you could have just said that. Like you could have just had the scene where those two dudes were like carrying her off and then like had that scene. And I feel like all of our human brains would have put the two things together and been like, oh.
I mean, I don't even think we need the rape scene at all. It just felt completely unnecessary because he's already harassing her. It's not like he's distributing. There's no evidence that he's distributed this new recording. So, plus I'm not sure how you pass that off because it's, you're filming a crime on. So that was another thing
I don't know. I wonder though, is that like a plot device though? Is it just like a plot device to like be like, oh, because then Suzuki's there and then he gets upset enough that he tackles him and then gets the shit kicked out of him again.
Mm-hmm.
But it like made him do something.
I mean,
I don't like the idea of that being a plot device.
Yeah.
But it very much felt like a plot device to be like, some form of something has to happen so that he will do something.
I mean, yeah, I get what you're saying there. Although I really don't think, I think maybe that was the intention. I think you're right. I just don't think it's even necessary. I don't think you even need that plot device because you've already got the situation where the guy's stalking her. He's distributing these videos of her. And in that scene, she just got done telling Suzuki about her history with this guy and everything. So he knows the full story now. So I can totally understand that alone being enough to push him to tackling the guy. So you didn't need anything more in that scene. So the rape scene it just felt gratuitous and unnecessary.
Yeah, it was also very out of place in such a somber movie.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, like very somber and very serious.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm laughing because I'm uncomfortable.
It was so
not because I find it funny, just because I'm very uncomfortable.
It felt very uncomfortable. I felt the same way. I'm just like, I don't understand why we're watching this.
Yeah, and I was like, this feels like lightly long. Even if you were just trying to get the like idea across, this feels like longer than it needs to be. Mm-hmm. So I was like, I'm laughing because I'm uncomfortable.
No, absolutely. I'm right there with you. It was so bizarre. Yeah, yeah. Completely unnecessary.
The only way I'm just like, it's a plot device, mm-hmm. which I don't love. But I feel like that's the only way I'm like, it makes sense because it's not like a character development.
No, not
I don't know how that would be character development ever, but like it wasn't.
Yeah. It wasn't. It doesn't add anything. It's just let's move on from that.
Yeah, let's just move on.
Yeah. There's also that, but one of the things I liked about that too is how we see the different ways of reacting because, Miyoko's terrified about people finding out about her past. But then we have that scene where, and we find out like Suzuki goes to her apartment and he doesn't care. right? Because he's obviously done shit in his own life, so he doesn't care about her past. But then when she reads the article and she gets a message from him asking if he can come over, and she says, "No, I'm sorry, you can't." And then she leaves. She moves out of her apartment after that too. So that also shows the different levels of reaction. So like even someone who has had this incident about her past has this whole situation where she's trying to escape her past. She's also not able to deal with it when someone else has that situation. So I thought that was it shows like the different levels of hypocrisy in society.
Also, that was one of my questions about timing too,
mm-hmm.
where I was like, I would understand if like she wanted to move because she knew that the ex-boyfriend knew where she lived, which like that makes a lot of sense given all of the context and anything like that. Like, but the timing of when it happens in the movie made it look like she was totally fine staying there with him knowing where she is.
Right.
But when she knew he was a murderer, she was like, oh no, now I have to move because a murderer knows where I live. I was like, but your ex-boyfriend knows where you live, and that seems significantly worse.
Yeah. I agree. That wasn't really made very clear. I get the sense that she was leaving because of Suzuki, but then there also is the questions like, well, Suzuki's done nothing to you up until now except help you. Whereas this guy has been stalking you, but it's the Suzuki that triggers you to finally move out. So that was also a weird thing. It'd be one thing if we had some way of showing if they had drawn those two events closer together to show that it was just the combination of them. But yeah, that was also, I get what they're trying to do, but they're not really conveying it in a good enough way.
Is that the tagline for this movie? The tagline for this movie, I get what they're trying to do, but this was not the most effective way, maybe.
Yeah.
To convey what you're trying to convey.
Yeah.
And I think it's because there's so much packed in there. They also had these weird like fade outs where I almost thought it was going to end. And I was like, oh, this actually seems like it'd be a really good place to end an episode of TV. Because it would be like a black screen that stayed on for just like a couple seconds too long that I was like, is it over? I was like, no, it can't be over. I've only been watching for like half an hour.
That's a good question because I do wonder now, maybe if it was it a limited series then? Because I didn't pick up on that, but I'd be curious. Okay.
I think it was a movie. It's just like a 2 hour, it's like, what did mine say? It was like 2 hours and 10 minutes total.
Okay. I'm guessing those were, because this was originally aired on Wow Wow, which now that I think about it, I think it is a cable network. So I'm guessing those fade outs were where the commercial breaks were probably at.
That would make sense. Wait, they aired this on like cable TV?
I think so. Again, I'm not 100%. I'm just basing it because I saw the Wow Wow logo at the beginning of the movie. So I figured, and Wow Wow is this, I think it's like a Japanese version of HBO or something like that.
Oh, okay. I was like, if they're airing this on like cable TV, like that's a really intense show to air on like just cable TV.
Yeah, I
just think of cable as like basic cable.
I don't think it's like basic cable. Plus, there are different standards for what's acceptable for broadcast in Japan versus in America as well. It's not something that was aired on NHK or public television. It was definitely on cable, and I'm not sure if it was on premium cable or not. So
that makes sense. No, no. It really feels like it would have benefited from being a limited series.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or that same type of idea, because it's like, I feel like I said the same thing when we did Aku no Kyoten, where I was like, this would have benefited from being two things.
Yeah.
And not one really long, questionable thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it was, there's too much crammed in here. And again, when you've got the whole thing with the cab driver, it's just, it's tacked on a little bit much. And then
they shoehorned that thing with Shiraishi and her daughter. Where they just show her for like a second and then you never see her again till the very end in the like weird montage of like everyone's having a touching moment or having a realization. And I was like, oh.
Yeah, you read my mind. I was actually gonna touch on Shiraishi next because there's that whole idea of the fact that she's there as a caretaker for these damaged kids, and in a way she ends up neglecting her own daughter because of that, because her daughter's always saying, it's like, well, you're not really my parent, but I need you to do this and that kind of stuff. And then she says at the end, when she had gone and got an abortion, and they call Shiraishi at work, and she says, the father of the baby's father said that we can call you if something happens. So, and right at that moment, there's a situation that happens at the school, and she goes to stop this student from killing another student. And then right after that, she says, she's like, I'm sorry, I have to go. And the student is shouting after her. He's like, you're abandoning me. You're leaving me. You're leaving me. And then she goes to the hospital, and, and the daughter says to her, you care more about those monsters than you care about me. He's like, so, well, I've killed my child now. Am I a monster? Is that now you're going to care about me? And then she slaps her. And then that's the only resolution we get to that whole situation, because then, like you said, the next time we see them is in that montage. So it's something that is very kind of like you said, this should have been a limited series, because that would have allowed that story more room to breathe. I like the idea that we're trying to talk about here about, these people who are dedicated to helping others. How much does their own family suffer as a result? Is it worth that sacrifice? I like that idea. And I think there's something there to play with, but they never play with it enough.
See, that's what I'm like. I really like a lot of the ideas that they were doing, and just nothing had room to sit with you, because it was like, okay, so now you've seen the dad go to the wedding and have people kind of pull him away and yell at him, and like we're moving on to watching two dudes drunk in a park and having this very deep conversation about life, and then we're moving on, and I was like, we are moving, this feels like the last season of Game of Thrones, and we are moving just way too fast.
Yeah, there's so much that's just jammed into this because of that. There's also the whole idea. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say, also the weird question I think that we keep having about like time and how time worked in it would have worked well in a limited series if you had like done one episode like per character, and then it would be established that like time is moving differently because each episode is starting in like a kind of different place, and they're just gonna overlap.
Yeah,
and I'm like, okay, that would make sense.
Or if we seem like the same scene played from two different perspectives in two different episodes or something like that. Yeah, I agree. That would have helped out a lot. There's also the idea of the flatmates, because I think there was more to explore too with their relationship and how they react to what they find out about Suzuki, because they read this article and they're almost judgmental of Masuda at first. They're like, did you do this? And he's like, no, it wasn't me. And like, but they got the picture from karaoke, and then they're like, but I can't believe that a murderer is living with us. So there's something there to talk about, where the fact that they're angry at Masuda for exposing this, but then at the same time, they're horrified to know. So it's like, well, did you want to know or not? There's more to explore there, but it's just handled in that very brief scene, and then they never have enough time to pick up on it anymore.
But then there was like weird scenes, right? Like there was that scene where that one dude is like laying on the floor throwing up. Where I was like, I feel like we could have cut out some of the length of those scenes and given them to other things with like the same characters.
Yeah.
And they would have better served the very long run time.
Well, I mean, I think that was supposed, because that guy drinks a lot. He's like drinking every time we see him. So I guess the idea that they're trying to convey is, the kind of people who work in these menial jobs are the people who are trying to run away from something. And so he's drinking as well to try to get over something in his own past too. Is kind of I think what they were trying to convey, but that's not executed very well.
Yeah, I think it was a combination of that plus like, Suzuki, even though they'd already kind of by that point like established like he didn't want to be involved with people. That it was like, he says he doesn't want to be involved with people, and when people are watching him, he doesn't want to be involved with people, but he's still there like taking care of that dude when he stumbles in and like is vomiting on the floor.
Right. Yeah.
Like he's the one who's like taking him to his room and cleaning up.
And also
and it's like, he does care.
And like when Masuda cuts his finger, he's the one who helps out and stays calm in that situation. That too, it's done to convey that idea, but there's another side to that story that we're not getting at all. And that was a little bit frustrating to me. I
wanted to know more about his crime too.
I want to know more about his crime, because there's that whole thing about, the 5-pointed star. And I'm trying to think, I'm like, well, that feels like it has some significance to, it's something that we should know more about, but we don't get enough there. And we meet that, there's that one scene where Masuda talks to his classmate, and we only get these very brief snippets. And I feel like we could have cut out the Yamauchi cab driver story completely and use that time to better explore what Suzuki had done in the past. I mean, I'm guessing the idea is that it doesn't matter because the whole point is we're trying to see how this affects him in the present, but they make it so those very brief teases we get make it so you want to know more about that.
Yeah. Also, is it like, yes, the ultimate goal can be like, oh, it doesn't matter what it was still wrong. But it's like, as human people watching a movie, it feels like there is no resolution because like we know it's in the framing of a movie where it's like, no, but I want to know because it's like, maybe that would impact how I feel about this character.
Mm-hmm.
Like if he like cold-bloodedly murdered people, yeah, that's probably a bigger problem than like, oh, he bullied someone. I mean, both are problematic, but like there's a scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, also there's the idea of why Masuda quit being a reporter, right? We get that very brief discussion with his colleague about him punching out his editor because his editor had changed the story or something like that. And this could be a problem with the subtitle, because the subtitles I got for this were pretty poor. But that wasn't really conveyed very well. I couldn't really understand what the situation was there.
I thought that the situation was just supposed to be that like he does not, like he wants to be in control of the story that he's telling, which then would make sense to later when he was like, no, I don't want to do this. And then he gets so upset when they like do it anyway, because they're just like, well, no, this is how this works.
Yeah. There's also an interesting part where the colleague, I keep mentioning the colleague, but her name in the movie is Sugimoto.
That's
where she's talking about you know, and he asked her this question, you know, what would you do if you found out that your boyfriend was a murderer? And she's like, well, I don't associate with people like that. And I like that. Again, this is a little idea we get, but then it's never followed up on. It's like, well, the whole point is that you don't know when those people are going to turn up.
I remember when she said that, I was like, anyone could be a murderer. That's what I've learned from years and years of watching Criminal Minds.
Right.
Anyone can be a murderer.
But there is this idea in Japanese society, right? Like, you know, these certain people that you don't want to associate with, and there's something there to explore, but it's, you know, she says that line and then Masuda just doesn't really, he doesn't really confront her on that line itself. He just keeps going on with his train of thought. And I felt that was a missed opportunity there.
Oh, this movie. The movie of missed opportunities.
It is. I think that's the best way. You know, we're ragging on this movie a lot, but overall, I did enjoy it. I did think it was a good movie.
I liked it a lot, and I would recommend it a lot, given the criticisms that I have of it, where I'm just like, yeah, it's really long. It feels like it should have been a miniseries. Because I'm like, I do think it shows through its, like, I guess 5 main characters. Like, these really interesting looks at, like, really how guilt can affect you and, like, how it can affect the people around you and, like, how you interact with society and people. And I think it's interesting because I'm like, yeah, I feel like every human person feels guilt about something. Maybe it's not to the degree of murdering people or, like, a classmate calling you saying they're going to kill themselves and you saying, yeah, okay, you do you.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, maybe it's not to that level, but I'm also like, yeah, everyone copes in some way. And I do think, like, all 5 of those characters showed it in an interesting and very human way.
Yeah, I agree.
We didn't like get to really explore how those worked.
Agreed. I want to talk about some of the performances too. So I thought, so you'd mentioned that Ikuto was the one who had drawn you to this movie in the first place. And I thought he did a pretty good job, but I think Eita was the one who really impressed me, right? The guy who played Suzuki. And he, you know, also as a note, he was also in Train Man. He played the Hikikomori character in the movie Train Man, which we talked about way on in one of the, I think it was in season 2 or 3 of this show.
Wait, he's in the movie or the TV? The movie one?
Yeah.
What? I need to go back and rewatch that. I love that movie.
He played the Hikikomori character, the one who's always in his room.
I love him.
Yeah, he was one of the standout performances in that movie. So, And my wife, I remember now, my wife had mentioned that when she had picked this movie up, she said, "Oh yeah, it's the guy from Train Man is in this." I thought he did an amazing job. Right, he's got a very he manages to convey this idea of being, saddled with something. Like when you first see him, he's like almost always looking down. He like never looks anyone in the face. And then as the movie progresses, he slowly starts to open up, but he's got these very strange tics and mannerisms that make you realize there's something off about this guy.
Yeah, he makes some very interesting facial expressions that were very kind of like, oh, if you weren't paying attention, you would miss them, and see just like his face switching back. And I was like, oh, that's actually, on my second watch, I was like, oh, that's actually kind of like very interesting and like only a little bit scary in like a good way. I was like, oh, does kind of seem like the face you would like kind of make when no one's looking at you. Like you see it when he's picking up the fingers. He like has a very different facial expression than he does when it's happening or when he runs after them. Which is why then for a second I was like, oh, was his crime really violent?
Yeah.
Because he was like very calm about all that blood. I was like, was his crime very violent? Or is it just because he's been getting the shit kicked out of him?
Yeah, he does some really good stuff. Any other notes you wanted to make on any of the performances or anything else about the movie? Because I know you watched it twice. So was there anything that you had picked up on in the second time that you missed watching the first time that we haven't talked about?
The girl confused me. Miyoko, she kind of, I know her faces, she makes very weird facial expressions. Because hers, like, look, and maybe it's not weird, actually, like, looking back at it and, like, her history, she seems to have, like, I think what you would describe sometimes as, like, a very active face, in terms of, like, it looks like she's always going to say something and then immediately, like, doesn't. And that was very interesting.
Yeah, she had. I think you're right about that. She was. I don't really know what to think of her. I feel like she didn't. I think part of it is the script doesn't give her a whole lot to work with, but it felt difficult to kind of get where she was coming from.
And like she always did kind of look like she was gonna cry, which I was like. So for some reason, I was like, "Oh, that makes me look lightly uncomfortable."
Well, also the scene,
which is fair. I was like,
but that scene when Suzuki is bashing his head in with the rock, and her ex-boyfriend, she asked her, it's like, is this the kind of person you want to hang around with? And she's just staring at him, and then she says, get away from me, get away from. And then I'm not sure if she's talking to Suzuki or the ex-boyfriend in that scene.
She's just talking to everyone.
It seemed
which
like
would make sense.
Yeah, because she's staring at Suzuki, but then she kind of helps him after, and the boyfriend's the one, he's just like, this is disgusting, I'm out of here. And so that just felt, it was a very weird way to execute that scene, and I wasn't sure what we were supposed to get from her side of that. Like, if the boyfriend had stayed, like, then what would she have gone to Suzuki? Would she have run away from both of them? I couldn't really understand what was happening in that moment.
I wonder if hers is like she wanted it's needing someone else to make a first move and then you making your move based off of like what other people do. Because it's like would it have been different if the like ex-boyfriend stayed and then Suzuki ended up killing himself? Well, I mean, we'll never know.
Yeah. There's a lot of things that just aren't very clear in this. And I think that is the best way to summarize this movie. Is, like you said, it's a movie of missed opportunities. It's a movie that is both, it's paradoxically too long and not long enough for what we're trying to talk about here.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Do you have anything else to mention about it?
No, I was just gonna say no. Yeah, you're right. It's like it's too long for what it did, but not long enough for what it could have done. And it's like, but it can't be that much longer of a movie. Then you start getting that really questionable area.
Right. Well, it does feel like one of those things where they weren't sure if they wanted this to be a TV show, like a season-long TV show, or if they wanted it to be a movie. And I feel like maybe at some point in development, it was at one point, maybe it wasn't intended to be developed as a TV show. And then they're like, no, we don't have the budget for that. So we're going to make it a movie instead. I don't know. But that
would make sense.
That's what it feels like, at least.
Because it does feel like they wrote things with certain intentions.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe even filmed things with certain intentions, and then we're just like, "Oh, we have this footage."
Kind of like what happened. Kind of like what happened with Mulholland Drive, because that was originally done as a TV series, and then the TV series got canceled. So then Lynch ended up turning it into a movie instead. Although they managed to cover that up very well in that, but here it feels like they didn't.
Oh.
Anyway, I think that's all we have to say about My Friend A. Were there any final comments you wanted to mention about it?
No, other than I thought Tomita did really well. Coming from my side of only seeing him in very comedic roles and stuff, seeing him do something very dramatic, he did very well. I feel like you don't always see people be able to do both very well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I thought he did a good job. I think Eita is really the standout performance for me, though.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it's worth a watch if you can find it, but I'd say don't go out of your way to find it. There's some interesting ideas raised, and the performances are really strong in it, but some of those story points just don't really quite connect. It's a movie that it's too ambitious for what they're trying to do with it.
You can watch it twice and still be just so confused.
Okay, Jen, do you have anything you wanted to promote before we close up?
No.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on again. And so that'll do it for this episode of Japan on Film. JapanOnFilm.com is the website, and we are Japan on Film on Instagram and Twitter. And also, please make sure to listen to the We Made This Network podcast. And that does it for now. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time. The Japan on Film podcast is produced by me, Perry Constantine, in conjunction with the We Made This podcast network. Visit JapanOnFilm.com for show notes, episodes, merchandise, and information about being a guest yourself. You can also reach out to me on the website's contact form if you have questions or comments about Japanese movies or the show itself. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at JapanOnFilm. If you'd like to help support the show, you can donate at JapanOnFilm.com, WeMadeThisNetwork.com, or by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find links with information about each guest and join the discussion on the We Made This Discord in the show notes of each episode. And now, listen to hear what's coming up next on the We Made This Network.
Hello everyone, this is Tony Black, co-host and producer of You Have Been Watching, a podcast all about British sitcoms. Myself and co-host Robert Turnbull take you on a range of Britcom subjects and shows in our discussions, including greats such as Fawlty Towers.
Basil, in the same way as David Brent and Alan Partridge and Victor Meldrew, Basil works best when he is actually dealing with arseholes.
Lesser known curios such as 15 Stories High.
There are all these kind of gag setups being put in place in that episode, and then the sort of the end minute or so is basically the payoff to all of these gags, and it's very, very sitcom-y.
And even top 10s such as sitcom theme tunes. If we have to put composers of theme tunes in context for British sitcoms, I think Ronnie Hazelhurst, he's possibly the John Williams of...
I was just going to say, he is the John Williams of
I think he is.
British sitcom.
We're available on all podcast platforms and on social media at YHB Watching Pod on Twitter and Facebook, so please subscribe, get in touch, and come and have a laugh with us.